Welcome to our channel. Today, we dive deep into the dramatic rise and fall of one of the most powerful empires of the 20th century, the Soviet Union, or USSR. We'll explore its origins, its expansion into a superpower, and the factors that led to its eventual collapse. And towards the end, we will reflect on whether Vladimir Putin's rise to power is a sign of the USSR's failed transition to democracy. The 20th century witnessed the rise and fall of one of the most powerful empires in human history, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR. This colossal entity, spanning over one-sixth of the Earth's land surface, was a force to be reckoned with, influencing global politics, economics, and culture. Under Lenin, the USSR started as a small federation, but rapidly expanded its influence across Eastern Europe and Central Asia. After Lenin's death in 1924, Joseph Stalin rose to power. He transformed the Soviet Union from an agrarian economy into an industrial superpower. But this transformation came at a tremendous cost. Stalin's policies of forced collectivization, rapid industrialization, and political repression led to widespread famine, suffering, and the deaths of millions in the 1930s. The USSR became a tightly controlled, authoritarian state. However, the USSR emerged from World War II as one of the two global superpowers, alongside the United States. It controlled much of Eastern Europe and began a decades-long period of rivalry with the West, known as the Cold War. Out of the ashes of the Russian Empire after the 1917 revolution, the USSR transformed itself from a largely agrarian society into a global superpower. The revolution marked the beginning of a new era, one that promised to reshape the world order. Under the leadership of figures like Lenin and later Stalin, the Soviet Union embarked on an ambitious journey of rapid industrialization and modernization. Its ideology, communism, promised equality and prosperity for all. The vision was to create a classless society where the means of production were owned collectively. This dream resonated with millions, offering hope to the oppressed and downtrodden. Propaganda played a crucial role in spreading this message, depicting a utopian society where everyone worked for the common good. However, the path to achieving this vision was paved with both remarkable achievements and tragic failures. The USSR made significant strides in science and technology, most notably launching the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into space. Yet, these accomplishments came at a high cost. The regime's policies led to widespread famine, forced labor camps, and political purges that claimed millions of lives. The USSR's story is one of dramatic transformation, immense sacrifice, and ultimately, collapse. From its inception to its dissolution in 1991, the Soviet Union underwent profound changes that left an indelible mark on history. The fall of the Berlin Wall symbolized the end of an era, marking the collapse of communist regimes across Eastern Europe. It's a tale of revolution, war, and peace, of hope and despair, of triumph and tragedy. The Soviet Union played a pivotal role in World War II, emerging as one of the victorious Allied powers. The war effort united the nation, but the post-war period brought new challenges, including the Cold War, which pitted the USSR against the United States in a battle for global supremacy. It is a story that continues to shape the world we live in today. The legacy of the USSR is evident in modern-day Russia and other former Soviet states. The geopolitical landscape of the 21st century is still influenced by the events and decisions made during the Soviet era. Current global political leaders often reference the USSR when discussing international relations and security. Understanding the USSR's rise and fall is crucial to understanding global politics in the 20th century. The Cold War era, characterized by intense rivalry and the threat of nuclear war, was a direct result of the ideological clash between the Soviet Union and the Western world. The policies and actions of the USSR during this period had far-reaching consequences, shaping the course of history. The Soviet Union's influence extended far beyond its borders, shaping the course of the Cold War, the nuclear arms race, and the fate of nations across the globe. From the Cuban Missile Crisis to the Vietnam War, the USSR's involvement in global conflicts had a profound impact on international relations. Its support for communist movements worldwide further extended its reach and influence. This video will explore the key events and figures that defined the USSR from its tumultuous beginnings to its eventual demise. Leaders like Lenin, Stalin, and Gorbachev played pivotal roles in shaping the Soviet Union's trajectory. Their policies and decisions, whether successful or disastrous, left a lasting legacy that continues to be studied and debated. We will delve into the ideologies that fueled its rise, the challenges it faced, and the factors that ultimately led to its collapse. The story of the USSR is a complex tapestry of ambition, ideology, and human experience. By examining its history, we gain valuable insights into the forces that shaped the 20th century and continue to influence our world today. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union invested heavily in science, technology, and the military. It was the first country to launch a satellite, Sputnik, and sent the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into space. At the same time, the USSR built a vast nuclear arsenal, leading to a tense nuclear arms race with the US. Visual images of Khrushchev, Brezhnev, tanks in Czechoslovakia, protests. However, the Soviet system was not without its flaws. Economic inefficiencies, political repression, and a lack of consumer goods led to widespread dissatisfaction among its people. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, the USSR experienced a period of relative stability under leaders like Nikita Khrushchev and Leonid Brezhnev, but the cracks were beginning to show. By the 1980s, the Soviet economy was stagnating. Mikhail Gorbachev, who came to power in 1985, attempted to reform the system through policies like glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. But these reforms only accelerated the USSR's unraveling as people across the Soviet bloc began to demand more freedoms and independence. By 1991, the Soviet Union could no longer sustain itself. Gorbachev resigned, and on December 25, 1991, the USSR was officially dissolved. 15 independent republics emerged from its ashes, marking the end of an era. The year 1917 marked a turning point in Russian history. World War I had plunged the Russian Empire into chaos. The Tsar's regime, weakened and unpopular, faced mounting discontent among the populace. Food shortages, economic instability, and the horrors of war created a breeding ground for revolution. In February 1917, protests erupted in the streets of Petrograd, the capital of the Russian Empire. Workers, soldiers, and peasants, united in their anger and frustration, demanded change. The Tsar, Nicholas II, was forced to abdicate, ending centuries of Romanov rule. A provisional government, composed of various liberal and socialist parties, attempted to fill the power vacuum. However, it was a time of great uncertainty and instability. The provisional government's decision to continue participating in World War I proved deeply unpopular. Meanwhile, a more radical group, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, saw an opportunity to seize power. The Bolsheviks promised peace, land, and bread, slogans that resonated deeply with the war-weary and impoverished masses. In October 1917, November according to the Gregorian calendar, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, launched a successful coup d'etat, overthrowing the provisional government and seizing power. This marked a pivotal moment in Russian history, as the Bolsheviks aimed to transform the nation based on their revolutionary ideals. This event, known as the October Revolution, marked the beginning of the Soviet era. The streets were filled with jubilant supporters, waving Soviet flags, celebrating the dawn of a new political order. Lenin and the Bolsheviks moved quickly to consolidate their power and establish a new social and political order based on Marxist-Leninist ideology. They believed that a proletarian state was essential for the transition to socialism and ultimately communism. Private property was abolished and industries were nationalized. This radical shift aimed to eliminate the capitalist class and redistribute wealth more equitably among the people. Land was redistributed to the peasantry, fulfilling one of the Bolsheviks' key promises. This move was intended to gain the support of the rural population, who had long suffered under the yoke of feudal landlords. The newly formed Soviet government faced immense challenges. The country was in turmoil and the economy was in shambles. Lenin and his comrades had to navigate through these difficulties to stabilize the nation. The country was ravaged by civil war, with the Bolsheviks battling various anti-communist forces. The conflict was brutal and widespread, causing significant destruction and loss of life. Foreign powers, fearing the spread of communism, intervened in support of the anti-Bolshevik White Army. Countries like Britain, France, and the United States provided military and financial aid to the White forces, hoping to crush the Bolshevik uprising. Despite these challenges, the Bolsheviks emerged victorious from the Russian Civil War in 1922. Their victory solidified their control over the country and allowed them to focus on rebuilding the nation. The following year, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, was formally established, encompassing Russia and several other former territories of the Russian Empire. This new political entity aimed to unite the various ethnic groups under a single socialist government. Lenin's leadership was crucial in these early years. His vision and determination were instrumental in guiding the fledgling Soviet state through its formative period. He was a shrewd strategist and a charismatic leader who inspired both loyalty and fear. His ability to rally the masses and his unwavering commitment to the revolutionary cause made him a central figure in Soviet politics. However, his health was deteriorating after an assassination attempt in 1918. The injuries he sustained took a toll on his physical condition, and by the early 1920s, his ability to lead was significantly compromised. Despite his declining health, Lenin continued to influence Soviet policy and direction until his death in 1924. Section 4. The Iron Fist, Stalin's Rise to Power. After Lenin's death in 1924, a power struggle erupted within the Communist Party. Joseph Stalin, the general secretary of the party, emerged victorious, outmaneuvering his rivals Leon Trotsky and Nikolai Bukharin. Stalin's rise to power marked a turning point in Soviet history, ushering in an era of totalitarian rule. Stalin was a ruthless and ambitious dictator who consolidated his power through a combination of cunning, manipulation, and brute force. He purged the party of his opponents, sending thousands to their deaths or to labor camps in the Gulag system. Stalin's ideology, known as socialism in one country, emphasized rapid industrialization and collectivization of agriculture as necessary steps to build a powerful socialist state. He believed that the Soviet Union had to catch up with the industrialized West to survive in a hostile capitalist world. To achieve his ambitious goals, Stalin implemented a series of 5-year plans which set unrealistic production targets for industry and agriculture. These plans were accompanied by brutal repression and forced labor, as the regime sought to extract maximum output from its citizens. Section 5. Forced Progress, Industrialization and Collectivization. This period marked a significant transformation in the Soviet Union's history, driven by the ambitious and often ruthless policies of Joseph Stalin. Stalin's 5-year plans aimed to transform the Soviet Union from an agrarian society into an industrial powerhouse. These plans were meticulously designed to accelerate the country's economic development and reduce its dependence on agriculture. Millions of peasants were forced off their land and into factories in the cities. This mass migration was not voluntary. It was a state-mandated move to ensure a steady labor force for the burgeoning industrial sector. New industrial centers sprang up across the vast country, producing steel, coal, oil, and other essential materials for modernization. These materials were crucial for building infrastructure, military equipment, and other industrial goods. Collectivization, a key component of Stalin's agricultural policy, aimed to consolidate individual peasant farms into large, state-controlled collective farms, known as kolkhozes. This policy was intended to streamline agricultural production and bring it under state control. The goal was to increase agricultural output and provide food for the rapidly growing urban workforce. Mechanization was introduced to improve efficiency, but the transition was far from smooth. However, collectivization proved to be a catastrophic failure. The disruption of traditional farming practices led to a significant decline in agricultural productivity. Peasants resisted collectivization fiercely, often slaughtering their livestock rather than surrendering them to the state. This act of defiance further exacerbated the food shortages. The forced collectivization campaign led to widespread famine, particularly in Ukraine, where millions perished in the Holodomor, a man-made famine engineered by Stalin's regime. This tragic event remains one of the darkest chapters in Soviet history. Despite the immense human cost, Stalin's industrialization drive achieved some success. The Soviet Union saw a significant increase in industrial output, which played a crucial role in its ability to compete on the global stage. The Soviet Union underwent a period of rapid industrial growth, transforming itself into a major industrial power by the eve of World War II. This industrial base was vital for the Soviet war effort during the conflict. However, this progress came at the expense of individual liberty, economic freedom, and countless lives. The human cost of Stalin's policies was staggering, with millions suffering from famine, forced labor, and political repression. The legacy of this era is a complex mix of industrial achievement and profound human tragedy. The fall, causes and consequences. Visual. Map of former USSR, economic charts, street protests, Western leaders. Host voiceover. Why did the Soviet Union collapse? Historians point to several factors: a stagnant economy unable to keep up with Western innovation, costly military engagements like the war in Afghanistan, growing nationalism among its constituent republics, and the failure of Gorbachev's reforms to deliver meaningful change. For ordinary Soviet citizens, the collapse brought mixed outcomes. On the one hand, there were new freedoms: freedom of speech, travel, and the opportunity to engage in a market economy. On the other hand, the 1990s were a time of severe economic hardship with hyperinflation, unemployment, and poverty. Visual. Former USSR republics, new leaders like Boris Yeltsin, Western influence. The West, particularly the United States, saw the end of the Soviet Union as a victory for democracy and capitalism. However, for many in the former USSR, the collapse felt like a loss of identity, stability, and global standing. Chapter 4. Putin's rise, failure of democracy. 1830 to 23 o'clock. Visual. Putin's early speeches, Russian parliament, images of the 1990s, chaos, Yeltsin, host, voiceover. Now, let's shift our focus to modern Russia. In 1999, Vladimir Putin, a former KGB officer, rose to power. He promised to restore stability and pride to Russia after the tumultuous decade following the Soviet collapse. Under Putin, the Russian economy recovered, largely due to high oil prices, and there was a renewed sense of national pride. Visual. Putin, Kremlin, Russian flag, military parades. But Putin's leadership has been marked by a significant rollback of democratic freedoms. Political opposition is suppressed, state media controls the narrative, and elections are often criticized as unfair. Many ask, does Putin's rise signal a failure of democracy in the post-Soviet space? Visual. Protests in Russia, Alexei Navalny, anti-corruption movements. Some argue that the rapid shift from a rigid authoritarian regime to democracy was too much, too fast for Russia. The economic chaos of the 1990s disillusioned many Russians with democratic ideals, paving the way for a strongman like Putin, who promised stability and order. Visual. Putin and world leaders, maps showing geopolitical tensions, NATO, Ukraine. Others contend that Putin's rise shows that democracy was never fully established in Russia. Instead, they see a continuation of the authoritarian legacy of the Soviet Union, adapted for the 21st century. Moreover, Putin's foreign policy, especially regarding Ukraine and NATO, echoes the USSR's confrontational stance against the West. Conclusion. Legacy and lessons. 23 o'clock, 25:00. Visual. Images of USSR and modern Russia, interviews with historians or experts. Host voiceover. So, what can we learn from the rise and fall of the USSR? Its story is one of ambition and tragedy, marked by moments of extraordinary achievement and profound suffering. It shaped the 20th century and continues to influence global politics today. Visual. Closing montage of Soviet monuments, modern Russian life, and global leaders. As for Vladimir Putin, whether his leadership marks a failure of democracy or simply the continuation of an old Russian tradition